I have this picture in my mind that's really still coming into formation. You might call it a dream or a vision, but it's still not quite clear yet what it's going to turn into. I just have this idea of what I see as being my hope for the future of what's coming next, and I haven't quite figured out what it's really going to look like yet. I have a feeling that making a video and sharing that vision with others is going to play an important part in helping that picture become more clear and helping it come to fruition. But in order to share that vision with you, I first have to tell you the story behind that vision. One of my earliest childhood memories was when I was probably about 3 years old. I was sitting in my living room and I was watching some kind of concert or something, music video on television, and I stood up on the couch and I started jumping on the couch and doing my own little air guitar. I was just getting really into the music video. And then I heard my dad come into the room. I immediately was like, oh no, I'm busted for jumping on the couch. And he surprised me. He just started laughing, and he got onto the couch also, and he joined me in jumping on the couch and playing air guitar along to the music video. And I was just so thrilled. It felt like such a magical moment of dad kind of coming down to my level and joining me in playing around like this. This memory, it really captures what I remember of my dad in my earliest years. I've always been a very musical person, and I got that from my dad. He was a very musical person. He was always singing or whistling, and he was an avid piano player. And that's something he and I had in common more than anyone else in our family, more than my mother, more than my brother. We were the two, that was kind of our bond, was that we both were so musical. Some of my earliest memories were of me involved in music. I was always either singing along to something or whistling, or I was making up my own song. Like everything and anything I did turned into a song, whether it was something I did reminded me of a song I knew and I started singing that song, or, if I was doing something, I would just start making up my own song. I remember eating a banana, and I just was sitting there eating a banana. I started making up a song about, oh, this is my eating a banana song. And everything in my life revolved around music. And I really treasured the fact that I had this bond with my dad that, a lot of times when he would catch me singing, he would join in, or he would get me to sing along with him. And I loved singing, and I loved music, and he would always play the piano, and I loved to just sit there and listen to him play the piano. And I would stand beside him while he was playing piano. I'd start singing, and we would get in some little musical together. So some of my sweetest memories with him. But I remember when I was about 4 or 5 years old, he started to have mental health issues. First that I noticed of it was that he started to it seemed like he was becoming really grumpy. It just seemed like he was in a bad mood all the time. He stopped wanting to join in on all these musical things we were doing. I would ask him to play the piano, or I'd ask him to sing a song with me, and he wasn't interested in it anymore. He didn't want to do it. And that was when I first started to notice that something had changed with him, and that he wasn't interested in doing musical things with me anymore. I remember one day I was thinking about the changes I had seen in him and wondering what was going on. I just had this idea that, oh, you know what, maybe if I make up a really cute song, it'll cheer him up and he'll snap out of whatever this grumpiness is that he's in. I had this whole idea, this whole plan that I was going to make up this really cute song to welcome him home, and when he walked through the door, I was going to belt out singing this song of Welcome Home, Dad, when he came home from work. And I was so excited about how sure I was that he was going to love this new song that I had made up. Practiced it all day long. I was critiquing it. I was working on it all day long, and I was just getting more and more. I was so hyped up. I was so excited to show my dad. Then he came home, and he walked through the door, and I was so excited. I was so excited, and I just put all that energy into the song, and I belted out singing this song. I'd only made it a few words into the song, and he cut me off, and he started shouting at me, telling me to shut up. He just went irate and telling me how much he hated my singing, and he hated my voice, and everyone hates my voice, and I have the most annoying voice in the world. He can't stand the sound of my voice. He hates to even hear me speaking, and let alone singing, and I'm a terrible singer. And he just went off on telling me how much he hated my singing, and he never wanted to hear me sing again. And I was standing there, and I was just absolutely devastated. Let alone, it took me by total surprise, but it also was, he had been my musical hero. I thought he was the best musician in the world and I wanted to be just like him, and here he was telling me that I should never sing again because I'm a horrible singer. And he's just reeling into me about how much he hates me and how much he hates my singing and he can't stand my voice. I was probably 5 years old at this point, and I didn't even know I had started crying until he pointed out that I was crying, and he came over and I had a tear running down my face, and he came over and he slapped my face and he slapped the tear and he told me to quit crying, and he's like, "You're so pathetic. You're so ridiculous. You're a terrible singer, and it's pathetic that you thought you could be a good singer, and it's pathetic that you're crying, that I'm telling you the truth. Don't cry." And he like went in on chewing me out for crying, and more tears kept falling, and he kept slapping. Every time a tear fell, he'd slap my face and he'd slap the tear away. I finally just had to kind of like bottle it up and just sit there and take it until he was done chewing me out, and then he stormed off. I never let him hear me sing again after that. It really devastated me, wondering what had gone wrong, what had changed, that we used to have all these beautiful musical moments together, and now he can't stand to even look at me, and he hates the sound of my voice. As I got older, I understood that he had mental illness and it changed him a lot, but it's still like my heart ached and longing for the days that we used to be close and we used to make music together and we used to sing and laugh and play around. I longed for that. I grieved. Even when he was still alive, I grieved the dad that I lost. The dad that I knew and loved. It felt like he died that day that he accosted me. I never let him hear me sing again after that. And soon it kind of spread to not letting anyone hear me sing after that. I'm such a musical person that it just sometimes comes out of me. I don't even realize I'm doing it sometimes. I have such a musical tendency. I would sing in front of others if they smirked or grinned, or if they even said that they didn't like my singing. It always took me right back to that moment of standing there hearing my hero tell me that I'm a terrible singer. Any kind of criticism, any kind of critique of my singing, I just took me right back to that devastating feeling of being ashamed of myself for ever thinking I could be good. You know, it started with I didn't dare let my dad hear me sing, but after that, it soon became I didn't let anyone hear me sing. And as my dad's mental health deteriorated, he got more and more hyper-focused on it. And he wanted to completely rid me of any kind of musicalness in my personality. Oh, he would slap me if he caught me bopping my head along to a song. And it even got to where, like, if I was listening to music, he could tell by the look on my face if I was imagining myself singing along or playing along to a song. He didn't even want me imagining myself being musical at all. He would tell me that it was because I was female. He said that music making is for men only, and the female's place in this world is to take care of her man. And so all that I was allowed to do in my life is be a wife and be a mother. So I wasn't allowed to have any aspirations for being anything other than making babies and cooking dinner. I think that he saw the musical part of my personality as being ungodly, because only men are supposed to make music and only men are allowed to have a life. A woman's place is to be there to cook and clean and be a housewife. And he saw that me doing something with music wasn't solely all about my world revolving around a husband. And so I think that's why he tried to like crush it out of me. If he caught me bopping along, if I was bopping my head or tapping my foot or whistling, he would chew me out and he'd berate me again about how sinful it was for me to think that I could be a musician, and pathetic it was that I thought that I could be any good at music. I was afraid of getting caught, even imagining, even like picturing in my head doing something with music was a big no-no in my house. It's like I've always had this really very musical part of me, but I always kind of kept it to myself and tried to keep it a secret, because that's the way I was raised. So fast forward to 2020, I was about 29 years old, and I had a couple years of therapy under my belt at that point, where I had been kind of working on resolving some of my trauma and trying to heal from everything that I went through with my dad. And therapy was kind of wrapping up. I was kind of getting near the end of it, and then, you know, this big plot twist came, and we've come to know it as COVID-19. The pandemic hit, and I was working in healthcare. I was working as a hospice social worker. my life was just kind of unexpectedly hurtled into the front lines of this global crisis. And it was tough. It was hard. I saw things I never want to see again. There's just so much death, so much grief, so much stress and controversy. You know, that first year of the pandemic, it was a very, very hard time for me working in being a social worker in healthcare, when I'm kind of dealing with all these dying patients and I'm dealing with the grieving families, and they're not allowed in to say goodbye. So I'm trying to help them say goodbye over the phone. And it was a very hard time. When I was going through all this hard time, I had several experiences throughout this first year that I was kind of breaking down at a point, and I was like, I can't take this anymore. I just want to quit. And every time that happened, somehow music would come into the picture. I had this night that I was really haunted by everything I had seen and heard. You know, I was watching people die from COVID, just things like that were haunting me, and I couldn't sleep. And I just was like, I'm done. I can't take this anymore. Right then, a live video popped up on my Facebook, and someone was there just playing the piano, a little instrumental, and it just like, it calmed all my nerves. And I laid down, and it, you know, this person just sitting there playing on the piano, it lulled me to sleep. And I woke up feeling like that was the first time I had a good night's sleep since the pandemic began. This same sort of scene kind of played out multiple times throughout that first year, where music really made a difference in helping me get through this hard time. So November 2020 came along. I was really kind of reflecting on everything that had happened that year, and I kept thinking about how these different songs and these different musicians, they really helped me get through these hard times. It got me to thinking back about how big of an impact music has had on my life, all of my life, and how these different songs and these different musicians had really kept me alive through the years in so many different ways. I was coming up on my 30th birthday, and I was thinking, you know, this first 30 years, it's been a trip. I've been through a lot in these first 30 years, and I was trying to kind of figure out, what do I want to see for my next 30 years? And I kept going back to the thought about how important music has been in getting me through all of my hardships. And I thought about, I really wish that I could do something with music that would help someone else as much as it's helped me. And so on my 30th birthday, I went out and I bought a keyboard, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to start to learn how to play piano and just see what I can do with music. So I got this keyboard, and I start trying to play, and I'm trying to learn, and I'm realizing I don't know the first thing about music at all whatsoever. I'm like dumber than a kindergartner here. And it's because I had always been so strictly forbidden from doing anything with music that I didn't have the slightest even foundational education around it. So, you know, there've been a few times that I've tried taking lessons, or I've tried watching online tutorials. It seems like every time I do, I get this horrible headache. I realize that it's because every time I try to do music myself, every time I try to sing, or every time I try to play piano, I still have my dad in my head. I still have him in there, and every time I start to play, or every time I start to sing, I hear him saying, "You're pathetic, you're ridiculous, you're stupid, I hate you. You know, you'll never be any good at this. Why are you even trying?" I hear all that in my head every time I start to try, and it gives me a terrible headache, and I end up quitting because just because I have such a bad headache. And so this is where I get to the kind of a plot twist in my story. So it was in March of 2021. It was extremely windy this one day. It was like crazy windy. I stepped out of my apartment onto the street, and I turned back around. I was putting my key in to lock my door, and I had my back to the street when I heard this like slapping sound. I turned around, and I see there's this like small, like floppy children's book, and it's being blown by the wind. It's kind of flying around in the street, and these wind gusts are so strong that every time it blows, it really like sends it flying again. I look to my left, and there's this lady, and she's holding a whole bunch of books. She's kind of holding them all, and she's trying to catch this one book, this small floppy children's book. But every time she gets close enough to grab it, the wind gust blows it a little bit further away. and she's struggling. And you know, I watched this for probably 20 or 30 seconds, and you could tell she's getting more and more frustrated that she can't catch this book. She finally gets to it, and she's just about to grab it, and then of course the wind gust comes and blows it away again. And then as it did, one of the books that was in her arms fell out, and you saw like her shoulders just dropped, and it was like she was just so defeated. She threw her arms down, and all the books fell down onto the street, and she just sat down on the curb, and she buried her face in her hands, and she just started weeping. I run over and I chase after this one book that she was trying to get, and I grab it and I pick it up for her. She still got her face in her hands, and she's still crying, and she looks up, and you know, I reach out to hand her the book, and she just looks up and she stares at me, and she goes, "My best friend just froze to death, and no one cares because he was homeless." I sat down next to her, and we just started talking. She told me her name was Peggy, and she also was homeless. And she started telling me the story of this really good friend of hers who was elderly, and he was in poor health, but he was living out in a tent. And she was telling me how he had gotten sick. He didn't want to go to the hospital because the hospital, they treated the homeless people so poorly. He had really kind of avoided going to the hospital, but he was getting sicker and sicker. But then there was a snowstorm, and his friends who would come to check on him every day, they couldn't get to him for a few days. It turned out that his health had gotten worse in that time, and because he was so sick, he couldn't do the things he would usually do to stay warm. He couldn't keep himself warm because he couldn't move that much. And so he had gotten too sick to be able to keep himself warm, and so then he ended up freezing out there in his tent. And while Peggy was telling me this story, she was kind of telling me how the medical examiner came and got his body, and they buried him in a pauper's grave, and everyone just went on as if nothing had happened. And she was really grieving the fact that it didn't seem like anyone cared that this man had just died this way. Peggy just kept talking and kind of explaining to me what life is like for homeless people in the area, and how prejudiced some people are, and how, you know, homeless people, they're suffering and no one seems to care. We just sat there on the side of the road for the longest time, just talking and just hearing her tell me all about, you know, how hard it is for people being homeless out on the streets, and how uncaring some of the housed population can be. This conversation, it really left an impact on me. I had been kind of indifferent to the subject of homelessness in the area. You know, I was like, oh, you know, if I see a beggar on the street, I hand them a few coins or something like that. And you know, I try to do what I can, but I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. But this conversation with Peggy, it really left an impact on me, where I started to really notice it more. I started to see it in the headlines more, and I saw the prejudice in the headlines more. You know, whenever someone would start to complain about the homeless in the area, or someone would start to rag on the homeless and the homeless, it was just this phrase. But every time people would say the homeless, all I could think was Peggy. And it became, once I had a face and a name and a story to go with all this, it just felt so much more personal, and it felt so much more offensive to me to hear people talk about the homeless once I had a name and a face to go with this population. I wanted to get to know the population better, and I wanted to learn more of the names and faces and stories behind the homeless population in my community. And so I joined this Facebook group, and it was for the homeless in my community. I immediately see a post on there that says it's some homeless outreach advocate, and her name is Rebecca, and she puts out this like SOS post of the homeless people that I'm helping. They're really in desperate need of bug spray and tick spray. The ticks are really bad this year, and people are afraid of getting Lyme disease from the ticks, and so please, can anyone donate bug spray? And I right then I messaged Rebecca, and I said, hey, you know what? I just got my stimulus check from the COVID stimulus check. And I was like, you know, it's more money than I need. And, you know, I'd like to donate it to help buy some of these supplies. And so I made an arrangement with Rebecca, and I met her at a shopping center, and I just had her fill up a shopping cart full of things that the homeless really needed. And then I used my stimulus check to help buy it. And Rebecca and I went out for lunch after that, and we kind of got to talk and getting to know each other better. So Rebecca told me her story, that she had been basically a millionaire in her earlier life. But after 26 years of marriage, she went through a really, really bad divorce, and she lost everything. And she ended up penniless and homeless. She was homeless for 7 years, and she kind of rebuilt her life all by herself. And she saved up, she was living in her car, and she was working full time, and she was saving up all that money until she finally had enough to get a home. And she really rebuilt her life from scratch. And once she kept going back to the homeless encampments and trying to help her friends. And she became a real advocate for the homeless in the area after she had experienced it for so many years herself. So she told me her story, and then she invited me to go with her out to the encampments and hand out all the stuff that I just bought for the homeless. She invited me to go with her to the encampments to help pass it out. After that, it really started to become kind of a regular basis thing where I would join Rebecca in going out to the encampments and helping pass out survival gear and tents and bug spray and flashlights and just, whatever they needed to survive out there in the streets. When I started going with Rebecca out to the encampments, I accomplished my goal of I started to get to know the people who made up the homeless population in my area. And I was shocked by what I found out. There was one day that I went to the grocery store and I bought a few things to bring out with me to the encampment. And when I got to the encampment, I see this lady coming down the trail, and I realized that the lady who had just bagged my groceries was coming down the encampment. So the lady that bagged my groceries was actually homeless herself. I met people who were in business. I met nurses, people who had good, solid, professional, full-time jobs, and they still couldn't afford to pay rent. And so they were living out in a tent, or they're living in their car. And I just was shocked, at the stereotype is that homeless people are all mentally ill or drug addicts. And I was finding that, there is a lot of that out there, but there's also a lot of people that are just down on their luck out there. People who've gone through divorce, or people who their landlord raised the rent and they couldn't pay rent anymore. There were children out there. There were teenagers out there, and it went up to, there was an 85-year-old out there. It was just, there was every kind of person. It really showed me that homelessness really can happen to anyone at any time. And it's not just about being a drug addict. It's not just about being mentally ill. There are all sorts of reasons why people become homeless. In the years since then, it's been a regular thing for me to go out to the encampments. And so one day earlier this year, I went out to one of the encampments, and I met this 19-year-old kid named Michael. And he was telling me his story about how he ended up homeless because his dad had kicked him out of the home. He had been out there for a few months. He was telling me, people have been really good to me. They really try to help. I've got enough food. I'm staying warm. I've got enough survival gear. People have really been good to me that way. And he looks at me and he goes, but really the core of my identity is I'm a musician. And it's been 4 months since I've been able to do anything with music. And I feel like my soul is starving more than anything, because I haven't been able to play a piano in 4 months since I became homeless. And right when he said that, I remembered that I had this keyboard at home that I had been trying to get myself to learn how to play for years now. And I just keep having this aversion to it. But right when he said that, I was like, oh, well, I could run home and get this keyboard and, bring it out here and let him play. That's what I ended up doing. I ran home and I got this keyboard and I brought it out there for him. And
to turn and run when all I needed was the truth. That's how it's gotta be. It's coming down to nothing more than apathy. I'd rather run the other way than stay and see the smoke, and who's still standing when it clears.
He started playing, and he started playing piano, and he started singing, and the entire encampment kind of came to a standstill. Everyone was kind of hustling, bustling, doing different stuff, and they all kind of just slowed down and stopped, and they all were like watching him and listening to him, and people had their eyes closed and they just were like taking it all in. He got done and you just saw him, like he'd been so tense, and you saw by the end he just was like so relaxed, and he goes, oh, and you just saw his entire demeanor change, and he really expressed how much he needed that, and how he had been a musician who had been living in a tent. He didn't have an opportunity. You know, his everyday life revolved around trying to find his next meal and trying to stay warm, and he didn't really have the time or resources to embrace what was most important to him, which was his music. And I had this kind of light bulb moment when I was out there, and I looked around, and, you know, I know these different people in the encampment, and I'm like, well, that guy plays guitar, that guy loves the drums, that lady loves the violin. There are so many artists out here, and there's so many musicians out here that they're struggling to survive, and they don't have the one thing that means the most to them, which is music. It made me think back to how much I loved music as a kid, and how detrimental it was to me when I wasn't able to embrace that part of me, when I had to keep that hidden, and how much it hurt me, and how much like long-term damage it did from not being able to have music. And I realized, like, these people experiencing homelessness, they're kind of going through the same thing. You know, they're not just a homeless person, they're a guitar player, they're a piano player, they're a singer, there's painters out here, there's writers, there's poets that haven't been able to embrace that part of them. And I thought back to the pandemic, when I was going through like one of the hardest times in my adult life, and music was what made such a difference for me. And I was like, these people don't have that out here. They're going through the hardest time in their life, and they don't have their music. And I just had this idea run through my head that I wonder what kind of amazing music would come out of a group of people going through the hardest time in their life, getting together and making music together. I start to have this vision in my mind of, I imagine being out there in the encampments and having like a full band out there, and having people, you know, really play their hearts out, just like this video I have of Michael, where he just brought the entire encampment to a standstill with one song. And I just wonder how much more amazing things could come out of homeless people having more opportunities like that. And I don't know how it's all going to come about. I don't know what's going to come from it. But right when I was in the middle of thinking all this, I really felt in my spirit, I felt God saying, you know, imagine what amazing music could come out of this, but imagine what an amazing worship revival could come out of this too. And I heard God say that the next great revival, it's not going to be in the studios, it's not going to be in the auditoriums, it's not going to be in the churches. The next great worship revival, it's going to break out in the streets. And I just got this vision of these like large homeless encampments in cities throughout the entire world, all breaking out and singing and worship and having a revival in the streets. And I really believe that helping the homeless people have the chance to worship, I think it's going to be a part of something big. So I'm still, like I said, I've just got this like small piece of a picture in my mind of what that's going to look like. But whenever I think about it, I get this like nagging thought in the back of my head that how am I going to play a part in helping bring about this worship when I don't know the first thing about music myself? So I really feel this like call and this pressure from God on me to, I really need to get serious about learning to play and learning to sing myself, so that when the time comes for me to help with something like this vision I'm getting, I'll have some idea of what I'm doing. And so that's kind of like my hope for the future is I want to learn music myself, and I want to, you know, I've constantly got my dad in my head telling me how terrible I am, and I think that the best way to fight that voice is by doing more of what he's telling me to stop doing. And so I want to start being comfortable playing in front of others and singing in front of others, and I feel like that's going to somehow lead to me being able to help do something with the homeless. And again, I don't really know where all this is going, but that's kind of part of what this YouTube channel will be for, is documenting my progress, learning how to play and learning how to sing, and seeing what comes with this homeless outreach. And so stay tuned.